evil corpse when Nestlé poisoned babies. You may realize this about me after spending any amount of time on this channel. I despise corporations, and the corporate world as a whole. What you may not know is that I have worked a number of corporate jobs, in PR/marketing to be precise, and I've gotten a first-hand taste of just how evil some corps truly are behind the scenes. That is exactly why I want to make this series. Other than every now and then when the news actually talks about the terrible actions of some of these companies, most of what they do is ignored or quickly forgotten, sometimes because of their very competent PR departments. This series will serve to preserve in our memory all of the evil crap these disgusting monoliths of greed and capitalist corruption are responsible for. It doesn't matter if we're talking recent events or even things as far back as 100 years ago. There's a long laundry list of events, controversies, and undeniably evil acts that these corps have been both proven to be at fault for, or at the very least, allegedly linked to. Nothing will be off limits. Much of this, for legal purposes, is alleged. Wink wink. Today we talk about a true monolith of corporate evil, Nestlé. I can already hear some of you saying, Nestlé? We've gone from Activision Blizzard to Nestlé the chocolate guys? Well, I have come to realize over the years that some of you guys have no idea just how much Nestlé owns and controls in this lovely little world of ours. If you don't know, well, have a nice long look at this image. Here you can see all the brands that Nestlé owns and thus directly controls and profits from. I know, they suddenly seem like a much bigger deal than they might have previously, don't they? Of course, to be as large as Nestlé, well, there has to be a bit of history behind your corporation, right? Oh, there is. Nestlé's origins date all the way back to the 1860s, when a man by the name of Henry Nestlé, at the age of 53, opened an infant formula company in Switzerland. In 1874, the company was then purchased by another fellow named Jules Monnerat. I really did want to call him Monnerat too, don't worry. And from there it proceeded to tango with its main competitor, the Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company, for 30 years, before they both merged, which led to the product that Nestlé is now best known for, their many chocolate-based concoctions. Since then, Nestlé has had 100+ years to do all the terrible crap you can think of as a corporation. Today we'll be covering a very specific one of those things, one that arguably stands out among not just the misdeeds of Nestlé themselves, but those of many other corporations competing for the seat of seeing who can be the king of most wretched. Nestlé and the infant formula scandal. As you may have noticed, Nestlé, at least under Henry Nestlé, originally started off as a baby formula company. When it comes to baby formula, it is a necessity for some mothers who are simply not able to produce milk, or for whatever reason unable to breastfeed their babies. So in its most basic form, it doesn't have to be a destructive product by any means. However, Nestlé, being evil corporate cocksuckers as we all know, have since their conception in 1867 marketed their baby formula as better for infants than breast milk, a categorically false statement. By the 1970s, Nestlé reached a point where baby formula sales were not growing as much as they wanted them to year by year anymore. They had hit a sort of market cap in the West. Well, you know how this goes. Lack of growth is not an acceptable thing for the average parasitic shareholder, so growth had to continue, whatever the cost. Thus, Nestlé decided to go even harder on their propaganda, marketing, that baby formula is better than breast milk, but instead target developing countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. What do you think is the result of heavy-handed marketing and underhanded tactics aimed at new mothers in areas that had at the time a lot less resources and a lot less education about the health and raising of babies? It simply worked. You see, this approach was particularly effective in regions where Western products were associated with progress and modernization. Nestlé's advertisements frequently depicted healthy, well-nourished babies fed with formula, creating an unrealistic and aspirational image for mothers who looked to the West as a bastion of progress when it came to products and developments. Thus, many bought into the copious amounts of advertising. This was at the same time when research in the West was showing the exact opposite to Nestlé's baseless claims, with many arriving at the conclusion that vitamin A found in breast milk prevents blindness, lowers the risk of death and common diseases in babies, and the zinc present even staves off diarrhea, allowing them to better absorb nutrients and grow. Co-opting the medical industry and the evil of free samples. Now look, if it was just blatant lies and propaganda, I think we'd not consider this to be one of the most terrible things a company has ever done, cause they all do those things, but it gets so much worse. You see, Nestlé, outside of their pamphlets, posters, and advertising in every single possible format of media, went one step further to ensure they'd get as many paying customers out of these new mothers as they could. They hired and sent out sales girls dressed as nurses in the third world countries they were targeting. Let me reiterate this one more time. They hired women with no medical knowledge or expertise and sent them to new mothers' homes unannounced to sell them formula. Is your blood starting to boil? Because mine could cook a frog right about now, maybe even one or two corporate execs who work at Nestlé. Imagine being sold this formula by a woman dressed as a healthcare worker who is reassuring you that while breastfeeding was best, breastfeeding would require all these supplementary foods that these mothers couldn't hope to afford, whereas their amazing formula would be just fine on its own. Not just blatant lies, but lies from salespeople masquerading as trained healthcare experts. I would like to see whoever came up with this idea quite literally hung from a light post. But it somehow gets worse. The amount of formula these samples supposedly contained was worked out mathematically to run out to the day on which a mother's own breast milk would dry out and stop being produced if she's not been feeding her baby herself. They ensured that you would use these samples just long enough to rob you of your biological ability to provide milk for your infant. One does have to wonder why Nestlé still exists to this day, why it wasn't burned to the ground for being a despicable den of lunatics who care for nothing other than their bottom line. But then there's the answer within the question, because they care about nothing except their bottom line. And with that money, you can always grease the right palms and stay out of any hot water. Then there was the very real psychological effects of these tactics and propaganda. You see, it's been proven quite a few times over in numerous studies that stress, fear, pain, or sadness can actually result in the biological drying up of breast milk production. Human bodies react to our state of mind, and part of what is known as the letdown reflex, which controls the flow of milk to the mother's nipple, is a nervous mechanism. Therefore, by psychologically having the fear induced in them that their breast milk won't be enough to provide what their baby needs, some of them would just at times stop producing any natural breast milk.
But wait! There's more!
Nestlé wasn't satisfied simply hiring saleswomen and dressing them up as nurses to pull these despicable marketing stunts. They went straight to the source and used their money and influence to buy out actual doctors and hospitals in these developing countries. Oh boy, the things a bit of money can do in the right places. Allegedly, in exchange for handing out discharge packs of formula, the involved hospitals would receive freebies like formula and baby bottles for their own stocks. May I remind you, these are hospitals in greatly underdeveloped areas that would do anything for more resources. Yet, more insidious than even that was the free architectural service these hospitals would get offered, where entire buildings and facilities would get renovated for newborn care so long as the hospital fulfilled their part of giving out samples and encouraging women to use them as opposed to breastfeeding. Baby milk companies Nestlé included, also allegedly spent millions of dollars subsidizing office furnishings, research projects, gifts, conferences, publications, and travel junkets of the medical profession in these places. They quite literally, using their insane amounts of wealth, bought out actual hospitals and doctors to peddle their snake oil piss to new mothers. The consequences. In the Times, United States Agency for International Development official Dr. Stephen Joseph blamed reliance on baby formula for 1 million infant deaths every year through malnutrition and diarrheal diseases. 1 million dead infants every year. It is alleged that Nestlé and their own baby formula resulted in 66,000 infant deaths in these areas in just the year of 1981. One of the side effects of doing this in a lot of third world countries is that, as Nestlé well knew, people were very poor, meaning it was common practice to dilute baby formula with water. However, what's one thing that most third world countries in the 70s, much less nowadays, don't have very consistent, safe access to? That's right, clean water. So a lot of times what this baby formula was mixed with was contaminated water, or water that never even got boiled to be made more sanitary. Nestlé argued that they included instructions with all their formula sold in these places in the native language, something that would maybe help if at the time massive swaths of these same poverty-stricken populations weren't basically illiterate, even when it came to being able to read their own language due to lack of publicly accessible education. Even if mothers understood the need to boil the water, they might not have had the facilities to do so. UNICEF estimates that a formula-fed child living in disease-ridden and unhygienic conditions is between 6 and 25 times more likely to die of diarrhea and 4 times more likely to die of pneumonia than a breastfed child. Another problem was that mothers tended to use less formula than needed to make the jars last longer, resulting in many infants receiving inadequate amounts. So not only missing out on all the protections breast milk offered, but also malnutritioned because to save money, some of these families that earned around $7 on average a week and oftentimes had multiple babies could literally not afford to use the formula up too quickly. The marketing efforts of Nestlé contributed to the erosion of breastfeeding traditions that had been passed down through generations. This not only disrupted the nutritional well-being of infants, but also had a broader cultural and societal implication. To this day, a lot of these areas still hold a large belief that baby formula is in fact better for babies than actual breast milk, even with tons of research now existing to prove the contrary. The problem has become ingrained because of bottom-feeding filth like Nestlé and will continue for decades or more to come. Backlash and how Nestlé got away with it. When all of this finally came to light, explosive boycotts of Nestlé products and protests took place throughout the world, including in the US, France, Finland, Norway, and countless others throughout the early 1980s. And then again in the late 80s, when Ireland, Australia, Mexico, Sweden, and the UK also adopted these boycotts and protests. Even to this day, several countries and organizations are still boycotting Nestlé, and have created the Nestlé Boycott Committee to monitor their practices in case they try to pull this shit again in the future. The WHO, of course, also got involved in 1981, passing an international code of marketing of breast milk substitutes. Too little too late, of course, as the damage was already done, as mentioned in the consequences section. To this day, Nestlé are still pushing their baby formula in many underdeveloped countries, and allegedly still bribing health workers where lenient laws allow them to get away with it, including more recently in India, where the country's apex medical research authority authority had to ask the company to stop paying/bribing participants in studies related to breastfeeding, including pregnant and breastfeeding mothers. NGOs and advocacy groups continue to work toward raising awareness about the importance of breastfeeding and advocating for policies that protect infant health in vulnerable communities to this day to try and undo some percentage of the damage done by Nestlé and its fellow baby formula peddling deaf merchants. Of course, Nestlé continues to exist, raking in yearly record profits, owning such a large part of the market of goods that people consume and make use of in their day-to-day lives that it's statistically very difficult to find a household that doesn't have at least one of their products or those under their many branching owned brands somewhere. Baby formula remains a booming market, of course, even in the face of global outrage now lasting half a century, as well as tons of new research into the harm caused by Nestlé's baby formula in specific and other Nestlé products. Infant formula remains an $11.5 billion market and growing. They didn't face any real legal consequences for these practices and continue trying to play hard and fast with the law and rules in order to ensure that the bottom line never stops going up. What I think they serve as is a perfect reminder of why we can never trust corporations with anything they claim or do. To this day, it remains unclear how many lives were directly lost to these terrible, horrible propaganda campaigns, and Nestlé still doesn't claim responsibility for a single tragedy. What does that tell us? When it comes to the choice between lives and profits, a corporation will always choose money over lives, even when that choice results in them literally killing your babies. Need I say more? If you don't hate Nestlé yet, don't worry, that was one of their many scandals over the hundreds of years they've been around. There are many more. Who knows, you might even learn about another one soon on a future episode of Evil Cores. Remember to subscribe, stick around, give it a like, and I will see you on the next one.